May I kindly request now Attila Horváth, who is going to talk about the restoration of legal continuity and the laws created in order to ensure economic political consolidation in the beginning of the 1920s. Distinguished participants and distinguished audience, my duty would be to summarize all those very important legislative issues and questions and activities that were done in this period and which resulted in the consolidation. This was really a very tiresome work, very cruel times, but really the codification department in the ministry, the jurisdiction and the courts and the legal science all united their forces to do this extraordinary job. May I just call the attention of the audience, though, that an important part of the legislators' work is invisible. When you go to the courts or when you go to the authorities, when some sanctions are done, well, that's the time when the problems or the hiccups might pop up. So that is why it was very important to note that the legislation and the law as a science was very important that the experts had to rely on. So one was that the country was taken away 2/3 of it. There were 300,000 to 400,000 refugees. There were 500,000 dead, 500,000 invalids. The invalids had to be taken care of as well. But in addition to that, all the economic problems and all the public administration issues that were coming up after the First World War and were also in connection to this treaty. Plus, there was the Council Republic and the revolution as well, which was again confusing everything. The revolution, which is called Őszi Rózsás Revolution, which is the autumn rose actually, which was actually not the revolution at all, which was using roses, but rather it was the chrysanthemums that was set away for the day that was commemorating the dead, and well, this was the flowers that the soldiers were putting on their heads. But of course, a revolution is always something that you do against a despotic rule, but this was not the case. But when we talk about the legal continuity and the restoration of the Holy Crown, here we have to say that the legal continuity is broken because Charles IV, who had been was resigning of taking the actual and the daily business, but the General Assembly that was convened in 1920 dissolved itself, but Károly did not organize any elections, and they are saying actually that there's a revolution, and by that they would like to legitimize their power. So this is the explanation after which they do and they make their own laws. And the Council Republic is doing the same thing, namely that there is a revolution, a revolutionary development is taking place, and they are taking place. These pieces of law are actually invalid because there is no General Assembly which would be convened by the law, and it is also not signed by the head of the state. So this situation had to be addressed or redressed because these were basically all violating the law, and these were taken as invalid and annulled, except for the laws that were done with benevolent intentions. But just think of the marriages that were concluded during the Council Republic or the divorces. So that means that the legal situation had an impact even on the everyday activities of the people. But how could they make consolidation. First, General Assembly had to be convened. It was the Friedrich government, which was given quite a major or wide scale of powers, because the suffrage was also given to the women. Margit Schlachter was the first member of the parliament, which was a major step forward. So this National Assembly was having major powers. But of course, the General Assembly and the Parliamentary Assembly makes a difference. It is being convened when there is an extraordinary situation, and the National Assembly has a bigger role in dividing the various powers, because the Parliament works in normal and peacetime, and the National Assembly is always a chamber, and has only one chamber, and the General Assembly can have two. So 1922, which is actually which is restoring the bicameral one, because that says that now we can get back to the normal daily activities, because we do not have to have a full-fledged National Assembly permit for the legislation. And the next very important question is how they talk about the state. First the People's Republic, then the Council Republic, and then the People's Republic, and again the Republic was proclaimed. So there were four various republics going through history one by one. Now people talk about the Third Republic, but here we only had, at that time we had four republics. So mathematically this is never going to be the case. But on the other side, these are the republics which causing a lot of turmoil and chaos. They even exacerbated the situation that had developed till then.
I'm talking about the peace negotiations, so these were very bad memories for the population, especially during the People's Republic, but also the Kari Republic was a period where there was no safety of law, there was no state of law. So most people had the impression, because you see not everyone has sophisticated education to distinguish complicated abstract notions. So most people, ordinary people, thought that the kingdom was much better, but then the republic came and everything went into chaos. So should there have been a referendum, I'm absolutely sure that the majority of the votes would have gone for the restoration of the kingdom. So on the one hand, let's talk about restoration. So the abdication of Charles IV was not valid according to the Hungarian public law, because it was not signed by the minister and it was not adopted by the parliament, thus it was invalid. On the other hand, the political situation simply did not allow his return. So then the question arose who the next king should or would be. And this was an issue people, the political elite, could not decide upon. Of course, there were lots of ideas emerging, lots of names were mentioned, but in the end they decided that until the final decision is taken, they decided to replace the king with the governor. And this is why Act number 1 was adopted, and that was the reason why Horthy was elected as governor. When we look at Act number 1 of 1920, we can immediately see that it was only a temporary law. Everyone thought that it would only prevail for a limited period of time. And this is something, a notion everyone knows in Hungary. Let's just think of the Soviet troops staying in Hungary temporarily for 40 years. So, although it was meant to be a temporary piece of legislation, they also they realized that as this temporary period was prolonged, they had to add new and new functions. And perhaps it is less known that in the second half of the 30th, the position of the governor is reinforced due to the extremist power rising in Europe. They thought that if the governor has the right to veto in parliament, they can avoid a situation when an extremist party in parliament could remove the governor, the government, and the rule of law. And so mainly that was the reason why the position of the governor was established and reinforced. Something more about this act. It had a much major impact than we would think. When in 1946 the act on the post of the President of the Republic was legislated, they returned to this act of 1920 and adopted certain parts. And this again happened in 1990. The other important area which had to be addressed was economy. There was an economic chaos, there were lots of refugees, lost territories, resources. Everyone knows the problems, but how could you consolidate the economy by means of legislation? Legislation cannot solve in itself the economic problems. The only thing it could do was to change the philosophy of legislation. Before that, in the dualist era, the acts, the legislation served as an instrument to solve conflicts. During the First World War, governments got used to intervene with legislation and the economic affairs so that they can prevent further problems. And after the Trianon Treaty, so many pieces of legislation was born and adopted than never before. This unprecedented pool of legislation was aimed to stabilize the society. They wanted to tackle unemployment. They wanted to somehow address social problems. And one more thing to be mentioned, the state support for cooperatives. Cooperatives provided support for very many ordinary rank-and-file people, and there were major changes also in the field of private law. They abandoned the previous regime, and private property in this era was only protected by the state if it also served public interests. They intervened into ownership rights, for example, and contractual law was another area where there was a massive state intervention. If someone got into bankruptcy or in a very bad economic situation due to external conditions, the court, he could turn to the court and could have his situation addressed by the state. Extreme interests were also forbidden, and the court system supported rank and file people. Then there was a moratorium in the case of landowners or peasants. For 5 years they did not have to repay their loan, the banking loans, or sometimes they did not have to repay anything. So I could make a long list of these problems that had to be addressed and redressed in this area. But also in the case of criminal law, there was this infamous Act number 3 of 1921, the infamous piece of legislation of the Horthy era on armed forces. Several hundred people were executed under this piece of legislation. But then we have the Cheregi criminal code, which could not have ruled or could not have redressed all those illegal activities that became so frequent during the Soviet Republic. And now in the 20s, there were some terrorist groups, extremist groups emerging both on the far right and on the far left, that should somehow be handled by means of legislation, and that's exactly Act number 3, 1921. And incredible, unprecedented cases occurred. Rákosi, the future communist leader, and Szálasi, the future fascist dictator, were in the same cell in the prison of Szeged. And finally, somewhat funny story to finish with. I would like to mention a few problems just to illustrate the absurd situation legislators had to deal with. Jazz music just infiltrated the Hungarian society. Jazz, which is a music, and jazz, which is a music you can dance on. And nightclubs started to play jazz. People started to dance in nightclubs. Who were the first ones who protested against it? The gypsy musicians, because they didn't have a job. And the legislators started to protect them. And there was a decree issued by the Ministry of Interior that stated that jazz occasions could be held only from 5 p.m. until 10 p.m. Professional dancers cannot be employed, and the police will inspect all those bars, jazz bars, where this type of music is played. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for Dr. Attila Horváth, judge at the Constitutional Tribunal, for this excellent presentation Paul Teleki said the following: the first thing we need to be strong in governing and to restore legislation. We will do that because you need willingness, courage to do that, and we have it.